right, let's go ahead and get into our first story, which is storage unit living. So a couple of years ago, tiny homes became a popular, topic, right? Like it started off as kind of this, I don't know, earthy kind of thing. A couple of people decided, why don't I just build a very tiny home that I can afford to live in, and I'll own it and we can put it on wheels. And if I have to move it, I can pick it up and move it. Then that trend started to catch on. And over time, tiny homes have actually become more expensive because then it became trendy, right? Like, tiny homes originally was for people who didn't have enough money to put down, a payment for a single family home. So they built a tiny home. Along the way, then it was like people that did have money to buy a single family home decided, oh, let's make this trendy. And they made tiny homes trendy. And then tiny homes became more expensive. So there are tiny homes that are over $100,000. Like they really found a way to soup these things up, right? My dad said tiny homes were just a trailer. His words, not mine. But now it has gotten to the point where people are actually living in storage units. Now, if you've ever had a storage unit, I have before, you put your items in there for an extended amount of time, depending on, when you're going to move. It's a place where you can house some of your items if you don't have storage in your apartment. Some people do it for that. But anyway, it's meant to be a temporary thing. And it's definitely not meant to be a place for you to live. But that's been happening. I want to start with this first clip here from TikTok. This was a story that came out of Boston where there was a family that was living in a storage unit. I want to show this clip first. This is wild.
Now to a sign of the housing crisis. People are turning storage units into living quarters. Boston Inspectional Services and police, though, are shutting down this dangerous situation. WBZ's Julie McDonald is live tonight in Boston with the changes underway. Julie?
Well, Liam, they told WBZ, a nearby business, that...
Eric, can we do a volume boost on this one? Sorry, this one's a little bit lower volume than the other one. But yeah, this story was coming out of Boston. Obviously, it's very expensive to live here in Boston. So I actually wasn't surprised to see this take place here. Let me do the
now to a sign of the housing crisis. People are...
There we go. See if it works now. I don't know what happened with this. Oh, hold on. Eric, can you fix this really quick? I don't know what I did. TikTok does that sometimes. Thank you.
Storage units into living quarters. Boston Inspectional Services and police, though, are shutting down this dangerous situation. WBZ's Julie McDonald is live tonight in Boston with the changes underway. Julie?
Well, Liam, they told WBZ, a nearby business, that it was everyone who had been living here was offered to be taken to nearby shelters. I did speak with a couple who has been living here. They were seen leaving, their arms filled with bags, walking away from what's been home for a year. How long have you been living here?
About a year.
Jose Rivera and his wife, just two of those, made to move out Wednesday from the storage unit on Mass Ave. He says they'd sleep there during the day and take off at night.
You're supposed to leave after 10 o'clock, right? So we do. We leave before 10 o'clock.
Inspectional Services was there Tuesday and found several units being used as living spaces, complete with curtains, coolers, food, and even electrical extension cords.
I've called and I've made many complaints about it.
Jamal Herring spends hundreds of dollars every month storing his belongings. Every time he visits the unit, he can't believe what he sees.
And you go in there near the bathroom and it's a long line out there, like people getting up, waiting to go to work or something.
He and others familiar with the area say this has been going on for years.
I mean, I know from years ago, people used to sleep across the street in the U-Haul vans. People break in anywhere to sleep. People do whatever they can to get by.
Okay, so that was Boston, right? So coming out of my spot here, typically what people will try to do is they'll try to be very quiet during the day in those storage units so that the owner of the storage unit and the management is not suspicious or doesn't hear them moving around. I mean, it's easy to hear noise coming from those storage units. But I do want to add, number one, I don't recommend this. Living in a storage unit is not safe. People have been known to rob storage units before, especially at night. So that other gentleman, he said he had been living in a storage unit for over a year. So that's coming out of Boston. But they're not alone. Like, there's another video I want to show you where it says many Americans are struggling to find a permanent housing. Some are living in their storage unit. Homelessness is not a choice. It's the result of high rent and a lack of resources. Let's get into this clip here.
Many Americans are struggling to find permanent housing. Some are living in their storage units. Homelessness is not a choice. It's the result of high rent and lack of resources.
First of all, I needed power for my unit. So what I did is I ran an extension cord along the power cable up here, and I sort of zip tied it up. So you can't really tell it's power is going to my unit unless you are looking closely.
So Monarch, to your point, when you said there's no electricity and there's no power inside those units, this guy found a way around that. So he basically has a cord running through. You'll see here.
So this is my unit here, and at the top of the unit you can see I have an antenna, and that's so I can get a cell signal inside the unit itself, because once you close the door, it drops all signal. I have a lock, which I've magnetized onto the door, so it looks like it's locked, even when it's not. And then when I actually do want to lock it, I can just use this lock or use another one down here and leave that one there. All right, so let's take a look at the unit now.
So check this out.
So in here, I've got my TV, entertainment center set up there. I've got my bed. I've got my kitchen area over there, complete with a fridge, and my couch over here. Once you're inside here, you can close the door. And I've screwed on a latch here, so that way you can close it and sort of lock it from the inside. Up here, I've got a toaster oven, and this toaster oven actually works pretty well. I'd say it works just as well as a conventional oven. I've got some dishes over here, got some more pots and pans over here, and my fridge is right here. Underneath, I've got a filing cabinet, some tools, and some storage for some other stuff I have. Up on this part of the kitchen, I have cutting board, so I can make some lunch or dinner there. I have a hot plate for boiling water, cereal. Up here is the Tupperware, and then over here I've got a food cupboard with all my food. And this is the sink I've built, and the sink is basically like a 25-liter container filled with water, and I've attached these tubes here, so you just open it up, then the water comes down this tube and out there. So you've got running water, you can do dishes, get a drink, whatever, and then the water filters into this bucket, which goes down into these holes here, which goes into a funnel over here above the bed. I've built a bar.
This is like MacGyver. You guys remember that show called MacGyver? It's like MacGyver, the storage unit version.
And this is just to hold all my liquor and drinks and everything. But I've also got stuff at the back there behind the bed. So what I've done is I've built this little hinge here. This comes out, and then the hinge drops down. And then that can hold in place while you go and get whatever you need to from back there. Over here I've built a clothing rack, and this works just like it would in any closet. Put your clothes there, except I've included this little latch here on this string, so you can push the clothing further to the wall, giving you more space. These are all like Philips Hue lights, so you can just turn them on and off with either your smartphone app or this wireless switch here. And of course I do have my router there broadcasting my network, which that's all connected to. This is my new TV I just bought. It's a 4K TV.
So you guys see this? He even has internet.
And I've got it hooked up to my computer so I can game on it or watch movies or do anything like that. It's quite convenient living here, actually. I even have a paper towel holder. Like, I have all the amenities you'd find in an apartment, just in a very tiny space. And I built everything so I'm ready to access anything and I don't have to waste time. And the only real thing I don't have in here is a washer and dryer, which is not a problem.
Now, these are just 2 videos that I've shown you, but you could find several videos about this on YouTube. Also, there's many more on TikTok. There's also some from vets that are living in storage units. I told you guys before, this country does not care about veterans, the way that they treat them, especially after they've been to war. But why is this happening, folks? Why are people living in storage units? I take it back to the same reason as why people were building tiny homes. Because the cost of living in this country, particularly for housing, is too much to bear. There was a gentleman back in the day, he had this saying, the rent is too damn high. Don't know what happened to Too High Guy. But he was right then and he's right now. The rent's even higher now, so much to the point where the eviction issue in this country has increased. And this is something I've been talking about for quite some time when people were saying, well, this was just an issue because of the pandemic. No. Evictions are still continuing to increase. And I want to go into this clip here. Evictions skyrocket as rising rents squeeze low-income Americans. Let's dive into this.
Now that the pandemic's renter protection programs have expired, eviction filing rates are soaring. Princeton University's eviction lab says that in some cities, the average weekly filings are more than 50% higher than they were before the pandemic. One reason is the rising rents and a shortage of affordable housing for those with the lowest incomes. The National Low-Income Housing Coalition says that to afford a modest 2-bedroom apartment, someone working a 40-hour week needs to earn between $16 and $42 an hour. That's
pausing here. So we're going to pull up this report again. I've shown it on this show multiple times, but that cost of living report in reference to housing, right? So people, the average American, they're not making the wages that they need to make just to have, just adequate housing. We're not even talking about owning a home. We're talking about just renting an apartment.
Much higher than the minimum wage in most states. Diane Yantel is the CEO and president of the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, which is an advocacy group. Diane, is this rebound or surge in evictions, was this inevitable once these protections went away, or is there something else going on, other factors going on?
Before the pandemic, we had about 10 million of the lowest income renters who were paying at least half of their very limited incomes towards rent, just to keep a roof over their heads. And of course, when you have such limited income to begin with, you're always one unexpected bill or financial shock away from missing rent, facing eviction, and in worst cases, becoming homeless. But
let's talk about unexpected bills. Here are a few that happen to people. Your car breaks down. You need your car to get to work. Let's say you live in a city that doesn't have public transportation. I've lived in those places. What do? How are you going to get to work? Unexpected medical expenses. That happens to a lot of Americans, right? There are a lot of people, we talked about student loan debt, but there are a lot of people in this country that have medical debt that they still can't get out of. Anything could happen. Let's say you're a parent. So you have kids. Let's say something happens with your child. What do? Obviously, parents are going to put their kids first, right? So all it takes is one unexpected expense for a lot of Americans to end up behind on their rent. And let's be real, once you're behind, it's harder to catch up, right? Not everyone has family members that they can reach out to say, I'm going to be short on my rent this month. Can you help me? Some people are all alone. But we live in the wealthiest country in the world. This shouldn't even happen.
The federal government stepped in really in unprecedented ways and provided protections and resources that kept millions of renters stably housed who otherwise would have lost their homes. But just as those protections were expiring and those resources were depleted, renters were re-entering really a brutal housing market where rents were skyrocketing and costs across the board had increased, and the lowest income renters are being squeezed more than ever. I'm talking about people who make less than 30% of the area median income. So, for example, that's a family of four bringing in less than $25,000 in annual income, or it's an individual senior or a person with disabilities who has a limited $12,000 to $15,000 a year in income.
Let's pause here in reference to the people that have disabilities. So JB just said we pay over half of our income on rent in my house. My entire disability check is spent on rent alone. This is why I have a GoFundMe to help with living expenses. My rent went up 25% last year. So let's talk about this for an example, because a lot of times I think people forget about the disabled community. These are people that are living on a fixed income. There is no raise that they're waiting on. So they have a fixed income. Meanwhile, their rent continues to increase. That's not right. But this is the reality for people in this country. Notice that she said once those protections were lifted, so we can go back to the eviction moratorium, all of a sudden people found themselves in serious, dire situations. And so here we are. And this is what we were warning about when Biden wanted to lift the eviction moratorium. We're like, what's going to happen to all those people who are already behind on their rent? How are they going to catch up? What are they going to do? And then people point fingers at the landlord, and the landlord's like, look, I have a bill to pay too. So you get this constant cycle, and this should not be happening in this country in 2023.
So they have very little available to pay for rent and have enough money left over for all of life's other necessities. And it's people of color who are most impacted and most harmed by the housing market. Black, Latino, and Indigenous people are disproportionately extremely low-income renters due to decades of systemic racism and ongoing discrimination in many systems. And so they are disproportionately likely to be evicted or become homeless in our country.
And obviously becoming homeless has a big impact, but also even if they aren't evicted, just getting that eviction filing against them has an impact.
Yes, let's talk about that. So now you're kicked out, you have been evicted, and you have an eviction on your record. Now you run into another problem. It is going to be very difficult for you to rent another apartment. Let's say you do get money that comes your way and you're able, okay, I got 3 months worth. I'm going to try to find an apartment. You have an eviction on your record. It's difficult to rent an apartment when you have an eviction on your record, because the first thing landlords and property managers will see is you didn't pay your rent at the last place that you were at. Why should I let you rent here? People who end up falling into this situation, it's very scary because it's a little bit different, right? Like if you have credit card debt, let's say you didn't pay off a credit card, you have that on your credit report. That's one thing. But it's another thing when your credit report shows that you were evicted. Let's go on. She's going to talk a little bit about that.
That's exactly right. Just a single eviction filing on somebody's record can create really a spiraling down into poverty that becomes very difficult for that family to climb back out of. It becomes more difficult for them to be able to find decent apartments and landlords that will rent to them. So they often are led to communities with lower performing schools or higher crime rates, which has all sorts of associated costs. and challenges for that family, for the community, and really for the country.
You talked about how the pandemic protections sort of protected against that shock, and it was the pandemic that was the shock. Could in any sense that be a model for safety net programs for renters who do get that shock because of a medical bill, because of some other factor?
Oh, absolutely. You know, the emergency rental assistance programs that were created during the pandemic are a success story. Congress provided $46.5 billion in emergency rental assistance, and with those funds, communities created over 500 programs across the country to quickly get cash into people's pockets to pay the rent and stay stably housed. So we absolutely should make this program permanent and permanently funded, keep this infrastructure that we built throughout the country, build off of these lessons that we learned, and continue to keep people stably housed into the future.
All right, let's come out here because this woman here, she is actually part of the National Housing Income Coalition that we're going to talk about as well. But I want to mention something else. There seems to be a really big disconnect here about what people are actually earning with their paychecks and the cost of living in this country today. And I want to go to this segment here from NBC News. Now, this was a part of Meet the Press where these are everyday people trying to explain, look, I'm doing everything, or I did everything right, and I'm still struggling in this country.
Kanika Williams is a single mom of 4 boys living in Cleveland, Ohio. She has 3 part-time jobs, cleaning homes, delivering food with DoorDash, and sorting mail for UPS. She's active at her kids' schools, cooks them dinner every night, and stays present in their lives.
Pause right there. First problem I heard, she works 3 jobs. No one in this country should have to work 3 jobs. And she's a mother. Does everybody see the problem? Why are people having to work 3 jobs, 2 jobs? You should be able to live in this country with 1 job. So that's the first problem when I heard this story. Why is she working 3 jobs? Let's go on.
Being around my kids, that's like the number one. So my kids motivate me. I want us to have stuff. I want us to do stuff.
Kanika puts her life together like sections of a quilt, caring for her sons, making money, spending time with friends. Each piece is sewn together intentionally.
When I have a roof over my head, I know when my small necessary bills are paid. Necessary meaning lights, water, gas, insurance, rent. I'm not talking about Netflix or any of those wanted things. Once I have those things taken care of, I have freedom.
Kanika has a medical technician degree, and the rise of gig work has given people like Kanika some level of autonomy. But she reminisces about how things used to be for previous generations. Her mother, Brenda, just retired from her decades-long job as a janitor at an elementary school.
I went to that school when I was in 1st grade. And that's where she's retiring from. So those 30-year jobs, those 40-year jobs are gone for us unless we start right now.
Between her gig work at $20 an hour and her UPS job at $16.50 an hour, both above Ohio minimum wage, she says she brings home roughly $1,500 a month.
Pause. $1,500 a month. When we look at this map, I'm going to show you, in a lot of these states, that's not even a 1-bedroom apartment. In a lot of states, that's not even, don't even try Boston. Don't even come here because that's not happening. And from what I've heard from some of my friends that live in North Carolina, they're still down south. I've heard North Carolina has gotten that way now too. So just that alone, that's not enough for a 1-bedroom apartment in a lot of places in this country.
What is your definition of a living wage?
Being able to afford your bill, your monthly bills, being able to put a portion back for savings. And I think for me in my household, if I was to make $3,500 a month.
What would that extra money, what would that get you?
That'll get all bills paid, a little bit in the bank, and maybe that oil change I might need it. You know.
Let's pause there, and then we're just going to come out for just a second. Think about what she just said. That means all bills are paid. Maybe I can put a little bit extra in the bank. So people who are making this type of income, they have no savings. So if you don't have savings and you have an unexpected expense, which we talked about earlier, what do you do? And this is where some people will go towards credit cards. They'll use those. By the way, word of advice, never use credit cards to pay for bills if you can help it. They'll use their credit cards to pay the light bill, to pay for bills. Next thing you know, the credit card is maxed out. And then this is where some people will fall even further into debt. They will get another credit card to pay off the credit card that's maxed out. Don't do that either. Just letting you know. Or people will go to a payday loan place. Don't do those either. All of these things are meant to keep you in debt, not to get you ahead. Payday loan. These places are just scams. You go in, yes, they give you an advance. They charge you more than you're borrowing, obviously. But then when you're paid again, you have to go and pay that back. Plus, you still got to pay your bills. Some people have made a habit of going to payday loan places because of that, because they're still trying to catch up. Huge scam. I call them predatory lenders. Now let's go to this section here about income growth. This piece is important.
Has not kept pace with labor productivity, so workers are more efficient, but they have less to show for it, studies have found. Since 1980, most American workers have seen modest income growth, but income for the top 1% has grown much faster.
Everybody who works for a living deserves to be paid a wage that honors the value of the work that they're doing and meets the cost of living.
Michael Shields is a researcher for Policy Matters Ohio, a liberal nonprofit economic policy institute.
For the last several decades, there's been a real disconnect between how much wealth working people are producing and what's being reflected in their pay.
What do you attribute that to?
I think it comes down to power. Larger share of all of the wealth that's produced in our economy is being consolidated by the very wealthy and by corporations as well. Working people are being less successful than they have in the past in bargaining for their share of the wealth that they make possible.
Let's rephrase that. Working people are being exploited. This is what happens in a capitalist system. The people at the top take a lot of money and the people at the bottom get very little. This is what happens. Now, I want to show you something. We're going to pull up that report because this one really irks my nerve. Now, this is the cost of living report for 2023. Every year, this organization, the NLIHC, releases a report every year. This year, how much do you need to earn to afford a modest apartment in your state? So 2-bedroom apartment is what they go by, and you click on each state and you can actually see what a 1-bedroom is as well. I want you guys to see something. First of all, a lot of people think it's just the blue states. So we're going to go ahead and debunk that myth. Let's go to Florida. Now, the states that are dark blue, these are the states that are more expensive. Florida's a red state. Don't come at me and tell me it's a swing state. It's not swing. Florida is a red state. Now, Florida is 11th in the highest housing wage in this country. This is the state that a lot of people from the Northeast would move to retire because it was cheaper to live. Not anymore, son. In Florida, you need to earn $30.59 an hour to afford a 2-bedroom rental home. If you make minimum wage, you need to work 111 hours a week. This is what people need to see. Ron DeSantis, hello, paging Ron DeSantis. What happened to your state? Florida, Alaska, another red state. 18th highest housing wage in the country. You need to make $26.32 an hour to afford a 2-bedroom rental in Alaska. If you make minimum wage, you need to work 97 hours a week. I think we all know Hawaii is number one. And we're going to go to Hawaii because I want to point something out. Second highest housing wage in the nation. You need to make $41.83 an hour to afford a 2-bedroom rental home in Hawaii. If you make minimum wage, you have to work 139 hours a week. Now, what just happened in Hawaii? The fires, right? So this foundation that Oprah and The Rock started where they wanted to give people $1,200 a month, you see why that's problematic? Let's go on. We'll pick out a couple of other ones. Of course, California would be second or first, excuse me. By the way, just remember this because they're already saying Gavin Newsom could be someone that they swoop in for Joe Biden. Just remember where Gavin Newsom is coming from. California is number one in the highest housing wage in this country. $42.25 an hour is what you need to earn to afford a 2-bedroom rental. If you make minimum wage, you need to work 109 hours a week. So remember that when people start to brag about Gavin Newsom. This is why people are struggling in this. This is why people are living in storage units, building tiny homes. This is what this country has come to. Even Colorado, man. Colorado is 8th highest housing wage. You need to make $32.13 an hour to afford a 2-bedroom rental home. If you're minimum wage, if you make minimum wage, you need to work 94 hours a week. Let's go to one that you might not think of. I was actually surprised to see this one. Nevada. Even Nevada's in the top 20. 15th in highest housing wage. You need to make $27.99 per hour to afford a 2-bedroom. If you make minimum wage, you need to work 100 hours a week. We'll check out Massachusetts. Of course, we would be here. We're third. I told you guys it's expensive here. I'm not kidding. Massachusetts, you need to earn $41.64 an hour to afford a 2-bedroom rental. If you make minimum wage, you have to work 111 hours a week. And if you click on the more info piece for each state, you'll see what's happening here. We have a $15 minimum wage. So you see, even with that fight for that $15 minimum wage, that's not even half of what you need to earn to make a living here in Massachusetts. So it's just, these are things to look at. Affordable rent for low-income households. You see this? Fair market rent, 1-bedroom fair market rent, $1,772 a month on average. I would argue it's even higher than that based on what I've seen. 2-bedroom, $2,165 a month. And I would argue that is way higher than that based on what I've seen, but I'm also referring to the Boston area. Now, what's important to note as well, look how many people are renting. 38% renters. We go down here. I want to show you another thing as well. Here we go. Occupations. Look at the occupations, guys. There's over 69,000 people in Massachusetts that are cashiers. There's over 86,000 that are food and service workers. You see, this is, by the way, this is the norm. Cashiers, food service workers, and don't forget retail, over 81,000. This is the norm across the United States. The average American doesn't have a desk job. The average American doesn't have a college degree. They don't have a master's. They don't have a PhD. The average American is working retail, food and service, or cashier. And they expect you can't buy a home off the. These are the things I want people to see. Eric, I think, put the link to this in the chat so you guys can check this out on your own. You can look at your own state. But there's a lot to see here. Now, I want to show you something. because we're going to switch this up tonight. A lot of people like to say this quote. We're going to change it. John F. Kennedy, this famous quote, "My fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country." You remember that quote? Some of you have probably heard it in school, right? That quote right there. John F. Kennedy said this quote in 1961. During that time, it made sense. The economy was in a completely different place. When JFK said that quote, that was during a time where people could have one income in the household, where one spouse could stay at home with the kids and not have to pay for daycare, where you could have one income and buy a home. Those days, when JFK said that, college graduates didn't have to struggle with enormous amounts of student loan debt for jobs that were eventually overtaken by AI and technology. These are things you got to think about. A lot of people they want to say this quote all big and proud, and you forget the time period. That was 1961. That was during a time when people can actually cook a home-cooked family meal every night. When the wife had time to do that because she wasn't trying to work two jobs and take care of the kids at the same time. These are things we got to talk about because we are living in a different day. This was during a time, if I remember correctly, this is before super PACs. Before all these politicians were bought by corporations in the military industrial complex. So just remind people of that when they repeat that quote from JFK. It is now 2023. So what we're going to do tonight, we're going to flip this quote from JFK and we're going to phrase it as this. Ask not what you can do for your country, but what your country can do for you. Because now is a different time. Now we have people that are homeless, enormous amounts of people that are homeless, people living in tent communities. Was this happening in 1961? People graduating from college with enormous amounts of student loan debt, as I mentioned. We have people that are losing what could be 30-year careers to a gig economy that doesn't want to pay people health care benefits. So we're changing that on this show. And you pass this on to your friends because I hear too many people, they like to say, John F. Kennedy said, that was 1961, boo. And we need to talk about all the things that were different in 1961 compared to today. We should be ahead of where people were in 1961 economically in this country. You shouldn't have to sit up here and struggle with your finances this many decades later. But that's what people are doing. We have advanced technology. We have advanced education. And people are struggling more now than they were back then. Let's talk about the African American community. Financially, African Americans were better off then than they are now. So you can't tell me that the system has not changed. We have allowed billionaires to buy up single family homes, increase the prices, so even these kids that are graduating with degrees can't afford a down payment for a home. In 1961, there was no BlackRock, boo. Think about that. In 1961, we didn't have Elon Musk and his Tesla and all of that jazz. In 1961, we didn't have a Jeff Bezos that owned Amazon and bought other companies to go along with it. What I'm trying to get to is we had less billionaires. That's why people are in the conditions that they're in. That's why people are struggling. And it's a damn shame. It makes you wonder what people like JFK would say if he were alive today. Let's take that comment on Rockfin, Eric. I think that's from Roger. Yeah. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. Never forget the reason why inflation is so high was because at the beginning of the year, Jerome Powell, head of the Fed, made it very clear when getting berated by Senator Warren that the only reason he's hiking up interest rates is to hurt working people because working people have too much leverage and they are demanding too much or are refusing to go back to work. In the Fed, replace with public banks. I screenshot each state to highlight in the lower left-hand corner of each state, showing you the more expensive jurisdictions. Thank you for that. Here is the link to the income inequality states in order. Scroll down the chart, then within the chart, scroll within the chart. Thank you for that as well. Oops, here it is. If you can copy and paste that, Eric, I can go ahead and pull that up while I go to the other comments here on YouTube. We got to have a discussion tonight because I'm here to tell you, I'm tired of seeing people on the street. I'm tired of seeing people struggling. And we just gave more billions to Ukraine. Well, we're going to get into that story next. Thank you, Zach, for the super chat. Garland Nixon always said, defy logic if RFK didn't exit. Thank you, David. People need houses. A home is abstract. Carlin. How to Sober says Sabby Sabs 1-bedroom apartments in the whole Orlando, Florida are now $1,800. Isn't this insane? Monarch says it is clever, Sabby, but what happens if one day the storage unit landlords decides, hey, you can't do that? Is there even enough indoor space if more people copy this guy's idea? I wonder. Yeah, you're not supposed to do that. They can find out. It is a risk that you take. Thank you, Oz. Bidenomics working for America, right, Oz? Thank you, Roger. Remember, you got the screenshots of PDF each state. Yes, thank you. I'll pull it up in just a second. Delthea said, and let's not forget your credit score. Not only can it keep you out of housing, it can keep you out of employment. Yes, ma'am. Especially if you're applying for any type of financial position. Thank you, Duckzilla. I've heard, at least here in Western Montana, that landlords are starting to sit on empty apartments and might have no choice but to lower the rent. Boom. That's good news. And thank you, duly noted. Ask what your representatives are doing for themselves with your country. RFK Jr. had his life threatened and not a peep from Biden and hardly a blip on MSM. That's on purpose. We're going to talk about that as well tonight as well. That's on purpose. Let's go ahead and pull this up. This is what Roger was referring to. Income inequality by state. I knew we would be on here. Massachusetts. Yeah. So there's a legend here, right? So if you see, actually, I could just do it like this. There we go. Income inequality by state. Washington, D.C., which is a district, 53%. New York, 51%. Connecticut, 50%. Louisiana, which is one of the states that has a lower cost of living, 50%. I'm wondering how much Hurricane Katrina has to do with that. California, 49%. Florida, 49%. All of these, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New Mexico, West Virginia, 49%. Now, West Virginia is one of the poorest states in the country. This is what we're dealing with, guys. You see this? Income inequality. Now, I can tell you, for example, Massachusetts, I knew about our income inequality, but there are enormous people with enormous amounts of wealth here. And there is this giant gap between all of the millionaires that live in the state and the people who are at the bottom. The middle class is slowly being erased. Something to think about. That is the cost of living housing report for 2023.